Tonight, the Great Resignation. Are Aussie workers about to quit their jobs in droves, or are they just thinking about their work-life balance? What's driving this shift, and what will it mean for the way we work? Welcome to Q&A. To the program. I'm David Spears. We're coming to you live from Melbourne tonight, and joining me on the panel, Executive Director of the Equality Institute, Emma Fulu, Telstra CEO and Managing Director, Andy Penn, in Sydney, health policy expert and former head of Australia's Finance Department, Jane Halton, author and journalist, George Megalogenis, and musician, disability advocate and writer, Eliza Hull, who'll also be performing for us a little later on. And it is great to have all of you here tonight as well. To have an audience back with us is terrific. Now, remember, you can stream us live on iView and all the socials. Quanda is the hashtag. Please join the debate. We can publish your comments on screen from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and YouTube. To get this conversation started tonight, I'd like to introduce Tony Valance first. And Tony, you've just quit your job.
I have just quit my job, David. Yeah, I handed in my notice with the Department of Education a couple of weeks back. So it's official. I'm no longer a teacher.
Now, why was that?
Well, it's a bit of a tough one because I love teaching. I did it for 14 years as a secondary teacher, teaching in Queensland and Victoria. And it was absolutely awesome, and I'll really miss the kids. But for me, it was with the pandemic, it brought about this, work-life balance, kind of an equation. And it made me start to think about, okay, well, what is draining me and what is sustaining me? You know, it was a situation for me in education, and you know, I was good at what I did. In 2019, I was Teacher of the Year at the Australian Education Awards.
Well done.
I mean, thank you. It was. You know, I'm still very.
That's yesterday, though.
Still so passionate about education and positive psychology and, you know, trauma-smart approaches to education. But for me, it really was a case of looking at this sort of tree of life. And I think for a lot of us out there, a little tree of life in this pandemic going, well, what do I need to prune away and what do I need to push into and grow and strengthen, you know, to support others around me? I kind of have to actually look inwards and support myself a bit more.
So what are you doing now?
So it turns out that my amazing clinical play therapist wife, Sian here, said, I've got a lot of clients, Tony, and could you retrain as a registered counsellor? And I said, so much yes. Yeah. So I've been doing that for the last few months.
Clinical play therapy?
Yes, yeah. So nearly qualified with that and working as a registered counsellor at the moment in a very creative way. I work 3 days a week. I don't stay up to 12 o'clock every night. I'm not up at 5 in the morning. I don't do 12 meetings a week. That was the average at one point.
So it's worked for you.
It has really worked for me, and so I encourage people out there to really have a look at your tree of life and think about what you might want to prune. And I guess in that context, my question to the panel this evening is, when it comes to large organisations, including education, when it comes to thinking about the best interests of your staff and of your key stakeholders, how best do you feel large organisations can support that pruning and support people to live a better work-life balance?
Well, it's a terrific question, a terrific opening for us tonight, so thank you, Tony. And George, I want to come to you first, and perhaps if you could just explain what this Great Resignation, as it's become known in the United States, is, and whether we are going to see something similar here.
Yeah, we've spent the best part of 2 years now looking at the rest of the world to get our cues from COVID. Could we keep the virus out? Could we learn to live with it? It came back. We got rid of it. It came back. We're now trying to learn to live with it. The Americans are a good 6 months ahead of us in terms of reopening, and their COVID normal is not the normal that we would have expected in 2019. There's a lot of behavioural change in the workplace that wasn't expected. The quit rate, as you refer to, has actually gone up for a lot of younger workers.
That's at a record level in the United States.
Yeah, and the Americans generally, there's many differences between us and the United States, one of which is the Americans are more likely to move cities and states in search of better job opportunities. We don't move as much. We may move from city to country, but from city to region, but we don't move from state to state. But the Americans are doing something that a lot of the modelling didn't predict. And so, of course, something has changed. The Americans need a new word for it. The Great Resignation is the word for it. Australia is not in the position where we're going to know whether we're going there or not, because we're still running two COVID economies. One that is just emerging from lockdown, New South Wales and Victoria, and the ACT. 60% of the population have been in recession for a second time during this pandemic. Queensland, Western Australia, South Australia, Tasmania, and to a lesser extent the Territory have been living COVID-free. So their labour force has actually added jobs month on month. They're actually well ahead of where they were before the first lockdown, March last year, whereas New South Wales and Victoria are in recession at the moment. So it's a great unknown what happens in the next 3 to 6 months.
It is, but I mean, anecdotally and listening to Tony, it is happening for some already.
The conversation's clearly already started in a number of workplaces.
People are thinking about this. The Productivity Commission's looked at this as well, but it makes the point only about 35% of Australians actually have jobs that are amenable to working from home. We need to bear that in mind. Is this more of a middle-class phenomenon, I suppose, the luxury to think about the changing
it has to be almost by definition a white-collar phenomenon, but there are people in the caring sector and also in education, in the services sector, who are probably on lower pay, who are burnt out. So it's almost this, you're really asking separate questions for different tiers of the labour market. For the middle class that can afford to work remotely or could afford to chop and change, a couple of days in the office, maybe a couple of days at home, and then I'll get back to you when I feel like it, that sort of attitude.
So we'll see in the coming months. Emma, you've already had your Great Resignation.
I have
and that was
already.
Before the pandemic.
It was. I was well ahead of my time.
Tell us about it.
Well, I resigned from a big international career. It was about 7 years ago now. And I think some of the themes are really similar to what people are talking about now with the Great Resignation. So as I said, I had a great international career. I was working for the United Nations, living in Thailand, and I had 3 children in very quick succession, including a beautiful set of twins. And then,
busy.
yes, indeed. And then I moved to South Africa to lead a large global organisation preventing violence against women. And I had my twins, who were 4 months old at the time, still breastfeeding, toddler, and this big international career travelling the world. And perhaps not surprisingly, I had a pretty epic episode of burnout and pretty serious mental health crisis, and I had to resign from my job. In many ways, I felt like I was resigning from my career. It was a very challenging time, and I moved back to Australia, back in with my mum. Thanks, Mum. My mum's there.
Thanks, Mum.
And sort of started from scratch, and similar to what you're saying, thinking about what's my life's purpose and what's meaningful, and how do I balance work with being a mother. And I decided that actually I was still incredibly passionate about working on violence against women, but I needed to do it in a workplace that centred health and well-being and was flexible enough to support that. And so I started my own organisation, the Equality Institute, to really, I guess, create the organisation I wanted to work for, and that was 7 years ago, and it's been one of the greatest gifts of my life.
And you've built that from the ground up.
Yeah, from the bedroom.
Andy, Penn, let me come back to Tony's question, which is really about how to enable that work-life balance and stop, as he put it, the sprint back to a frantic, anxious state of being that so many of us have once had. What's your answer to that? What can be done to help with that balance?
Well, look, I think the first thing I would say is that it's obviously been a pretty traumatic 18 months, I think, for everybody. And we're all individuals and we've all been impacted in one way, shape, form or another. And I think initially people started to think where they work and how they work had changed. And I think now that period has caused people to reflect on why they work and who they work for and what are the values of that organisation, and can I join that organisation and make the sort of impact that I want to do. But what's been really important for us is recognising that individuality and really adopting an approach to hybrid ways of working. And it's important that we don't confuse hybrid with working from home during COVID restrictions. Hybrid ways of working are really about embracing flexibility so that people and individuals can work in the way in which they want to and how they want to.
Just explain what that means.
Well, so for example, one of the things we've introduced recently is location agnostic contracts. You remember when you get a letter of employment, there's that little clause in there that says your normal place of business is XYZ. That no longer exists in a Telstra contract. We don't require our people to come in at a particular time or on a particular day. we allow them to take the flexibility, to adopt the flexibility. So I've got a gentleman that's just gone back to northern Italy to take a year's career break to be with his family. I've got another senior executive who's going to do his job from San Francisco for the next 9 months because he wants to spend time with family. It's really embracing the ability to provide that support to people who want to work, but they want the hybrid ways of working to enable them to meet their own personal needs.
So you're doing this as a CEO to try and hold on to good people, right? Trying to tailor what you can provide to what they're demanding. I need to point out, though, at the same time, Telstra is still in the stages of its T22 restructuring strategy. You're letting go of all up, 8,000 employees. And that process is still going.
Well, we've actually pretty much finished that process, and also, again, that needs to be put in the context that there's been a big restructure in the telecommunications industry. So people are probably familiar with the creation of the NBN. The NBN was created to do something that Telstra used to do. So it was a company that didn't exist before. So in a way, it's not surprising that our numbers have gone down, and NBN now employs, I think, something like 20,000 people. So overall, the net numbers in the industry haven't. But nonetheless, we've got to be productivity. We look at productivity. We've got to be efficient, but also we've got to attract new people. And the other aspect of that is that we're needing to attract new people with new skills in technology, and they're the ones that are really challenging to attract.
All right, well, let's get to our next question, which comes from Alicia Sergeyev, who's there with little Grace, is it?
Yes, Grace. So my question is in regard to the concept of hybrid working. What legislation exists to ensure that those who are hybrid working are not exploited because they have the tools at home and are connected to their workplaces outside of their contracted work hours?
Alicia, let me just ask, has your family experienced this feeling of being exploited through working from home?
Well, I'm a teacher, and so I can empathise with the gentleman over here, and everything you're saying about working till midnight and up at 5 and all the meetings, and that's, I think, just part and parcel of the job. And I think sometimes we think, oh, that's okay because I get like 11 weeks school holidays, so I can have some time to relax then. But in Anton's case, my husband, he's not a teacher, but having to work from home and also go and maybe even hybrid working, go on site for certain things. And at the moment he's having, because he's a digital content producer, he's got a lot of equipment in our only spare room, which is our nursery. So Grace is having to sort of compromise her first room. So so I think it's good in a sense, but if you don't have like the facilities to enable that, and not everyone has that, like we have a 2-bedroom apartment and we want to get a house and we want to get a bigger place, but in Melbourne that's not so easy because of the current situation with houses, and that's just another argument. But
that's a very good point, Jane. Let me come to you on this. I mean, work from home has been, I suppose, different for everybody who's done it. But is there a problem here of some employers exploiting those who are working from home, making them do more than they should?
So, David, let's be clear, we're not going to fall over a finish line with the pandemic, are we? And these sort of hybrid approaches to work, what we've got to do is figure out how we're going to make those sustainable. And I think people are right to be a bit concerned that the expectation is everyone's working 24/7, because we can't do that. And we know that our employees, regardless of what industry you're in, are reassessing actually what they value. So while we don't necessarily have the tools yet, and we don't really have a way to describe this, I think what we need to do for an employer is actually listen to our staff and start thinking really thoughtfully about what it is going to be, if you like, the approach to the new workplace, because we're not going back to where we were, and that's probably a good thing. But I think this approach to hybrid working and being cognizant that people have families and responsibilities, and when they actually work, it can be great to have flexibility. But if a baby needs a sleep during the day, you don't want to be in there editing digital material at the same time. She is going to need a nap. So we've got to figure that out.
Yeah. Now, well, Eliza, let me bring in you here because, tell us about your experience when it comes to work from home. We've heard some of those who, feel concerned about how it's worked, but what about you?
Yeah, well, I'm a person with disability, so I have a physical condition called Charcot-Marie tooth. And so that affects the way that I walk, and I fatigue easily, I'm in pain. And so working from home has been incredible because I don't have to have that time where I'm commuting. and it's draining.
Yeah.
You know, for many people with disability, you don't even know if you're going to be able to get through the front door. You don't know if you're going to be met with an Auslan interpreter if you're deaf. So there's a lot of barriers even to get into the workplace. So I think that actually this is a really great leveller and a great way for people with disability, many people with disability, to be included in the workforce finally.
That's a really powerful point. It's a great... Indeed, a great leveller for people with a disability. Do you feel that in your own career that you have actually been going through a period of much greater productivity and success?
Yeah, look, I think it's also important to be clear that still people with disability are underemployed. If you're a person with disability, you're twice as likely to be unemployed. You're twice as likely not to be employed at all. And so I think it's important that we state that. But for me, it's been absolutely incredible because I haven't been in as much pain. I've been less fatigued, and that is because I haven't had to, go into the office, not know if there's going to be stairs that I can't get up, not know if I'm going to be able to get through the door. Those are the things that, are big barriers for people with disability. Yeah, well, it is different experiences when it comes to work from home, and, Eliza, yours has certainly been a positive one. We heard from Alicia, and I think little Grace has just had to take off momentarily. But George, can I bring you in here, because what Alicia was talking about resonates with some figures that were released this week from the Australia Institute's Centre for Future Work, that on average people are working, 6.1 hours of unpaid work a week. That's risen. What do you think about this? Some countries like Portugal and France are now putting bans on employers contacting their workers after office hours. They can be fined if they do so. Do we need to go that far here?
You'd remember, David, as journalists, when the pager first entered our universe, and then the mobile phone, and the assumption was in our work, and it's obviously an assumption in many workplaces, certainly in the public sector. Certainly teachers would have had this assumption. Once you were contactable at all hours, people were on your back. And the other thing is, you felt, especially in the early transition phase through this sort of always-on work model, you felt obliged, A, to pick up the phone, B, to volunteer something. So I'm not surprised that we've added the equivalent of a half day, working an extra half day for no reason, for no pay. Australia's we're in a very, very strange position culturally, because we're still in the middle of this great deregulation experiment. We're about 30 years worth now of trusting employers and employees to sort things out for themselves. We've deunionised the workforce. We've sort of suppressed the wages of ordinary workers. We've suppressed the wages and the headcount of the public sector. So there's really no signal out there like there used to be in the past. You don't have a Gough Whitlam doing an equal pay submission to the old Industrial Relations Commission to try and break the gender gap in terms of pay in the public sector. You don't have one of those, very organised, like the metals workers, doing test cases on a 40-hour week, or doing test cases on an extra couple of days annual leave. So this negotiation, unfortunately, is corporation to individual, organisation to individual. And the only leverage individuals have at the moment is the collective burnout for the last 18 months. And the fact that the borders have been closed also for the last 18 months, we can't fill jobs that Australians can't do. And there are jobs that Australians could do that many Australians don't want to do, because the terms and conditions in which they've been set, because their recent memory of life leading up to lockdown was, they're going to ask me to work an extra day. I'm probably going to go into an environment where they'll probably let somebody else go and I'll be picking up their... Again, it's sorry, go for it.
No, I just wanted to jump in. I thought that, I think we've been talking about, we don't actually know what's going to happen in Australia, and I think that's very true. But what we do know is that the themes that are coming out of the US, the key reasons that people are reporting that they're resigning, is the search for greater meaning, which we've kind of talked about, worsening work-life balance, and actually toxic workplace cultures. And I think if we think about worsening work-life balance, which I'm sure many of us have experienced, that this is really a gendered issue as well. And if you think about the industries that we've seen the Great Resignation from, it's education, it's healthcare, it's aged care, and it's hospitality, which are female-led, often insecure workforces, often from communities that have historically been marginalised, and they're not only sort of experiencing this increased burden of work and stressful work, but also often picking up the unpaid care burden at home, including homeschooling. So I think it's not surprising that we're sort of seeing this burnout, but this burnout is also about structural inequality, and I want us to kind of come back and sort of remember that it's not about just individuals. There's some systemic things that we need to change.
We are going to come to that too, and how this has been a very different pandemic for men and women in so many ways. But it in fact brings us to our next question, which is a video question from Jennifer Ponzo in San Francisco.
As a nurse here in the US, I've seen firsthand what the Great Resignation has done to the healthcare system. With staff resigning at an alarming rate, those staff remaining are stretched to a frightening breaking point. With the Great Resignation due to hit Australia in 2022, my question for the panel is, what should the government do to prepare for this crisis, given there is already a healthcare staffing shortage? I have particular interest in this question as I am a qualified nurse who has been trying to relocate and work in Sydney for over 6 months, and the border force continuously denies my exemption to enter the country. Thank you.
So this raises a couple of issues, and Jane Halton, I want to come to you on this first. And this has been in the news today about the exodus of critical care nurses in Australia. They're burnt out. The Australian College of Nursing says around 2,000 nurses have given up their registration this year. You're a former Health Department Secretary. How concerning is this?
It's very concerning. We rely on the skills, the experience and the goodwill of healthcare staff right across the country, and I think the question's really well put. If you look at what's happened in the US, if you look at what's happened in the UK, it's happening all over the world where people have been dealing with this pandemic for 2 years. So we do have to think about the working conditions of people in these contexts, but we also, I think, have to acknowledge that unless we train enough staff here and we actually have a capacity to put them into our workplaces, then we're going to have a problem. And it's, I think, hopeful that we will have our borders open pretty soon, but it's worth remembering that for the last 2 years, we've had people arriving in the country at the rate we haven't seen since 1992. So we've had arrivals at 30-year lows, and that is putting huge pressure on our system. Good news, though, we've had some great people coming back. A 75-year-old nurse who retrained and went to vaccinate people in the Northern Territory, good on her. But I do think this is a challenge for us. Our healthcare workforce, we assume that they're there, don't we? We all just expect that the care is going to be there when we need it. And we have to look after these people. They've had a tough time. Even if you're in a state where you haven't had big COVID outbreaks, the stress for preparing and thinking about what's happening, it's pretty tough. So I think thinking about training, thinking about support for that workforce, and then in time having some people who will join us from overseas.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt you're right about the training, but you can't just, whistle up critical care nurses quickly. I know the Commonwealth has been working with the states on bringing in about 2,000 nurses and doctors from overseas. Is that enough?
Well, we'll see. Look, my suspicion is it won't be enough, but on the other hand, we have had some fabulous people come back into the workforce, even if it's temporarily. We should be in a position, I think, in the next probably 3 or 4 months as borders do start to open, to start that regular flow again. We do traditionally import, particularly doctors into some of our states and into the bush. We know there's a chronic shortage of workforce in the bush, and we want citizens, regardless of where they are, to get the right treatment. So it's a good start, but I think we'll need some more.
Andy, Penn, the broader question here too is about skilled migration, when to turn that tap back on, and whether to, as some are suggesting, fast track, accelerate, catch up for what we've lost over the last couple of years with skilled migration. It seems the government may not be too keen on doing that for various reasons, which we can discuss. But what do you think for business? How important is this?
Oh, look, I think it's incredibly important because one of the other dynamics that we've seen over the last 18 months is the incredible adoption of digital ways of working. We've all had to learn how to do things online, whether it's shopping or whether it's accessing support or care, even accessing healthcare. And we need the technical skills and the technology skills in the future to be able to accommodate that and to continue to build that technology in the future. And it's probably the area where, for a technology company, where it's the biggest issue in and the biggest concern.
So you can't find that skill set in Australia right now?
We can find that skill set in Australia, but just not enough of it. And
so you really need that skill migration.
It's technology, it's software, it's artificial intelligence, cyber security, all of these sort of areas. And of course, one of the government's policies is for Australia to be a world-leading digital economy by 2030. We are going to need to have the skills to be able to support that.
Some people would say keeping that border shut is helping boost wages. Maybe we're yet to see that boost much, but what do you say to that argument that we should maybe just slow down on reopening the border and help Australian workers?
Well, I think we're heading towards pretty full employment at the moment. So my view would be that should not be the reason for holding borders back. Now, I'm not an economist or a politician, so I don't have all of the ingredients that people making those decisions are. But I don't think it should be a wage inflation issue.
Eliza, what about those in the arts sector? What's a closed international border meant for them and for you?
Oh, goodness. It's been very, very hard. Like for me personally, I had my first show booked at the Sydney Opera House. Can you believe that?
Congratulations,
and
by the way.
You know, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But it's been very hard for many. Like I think, within the industry, the music industry, they're actually not calling it the Great Resignation, they're calling it the Great Redundancy. And without any support, any packages that you would normally get when you're made redundant. So yeah, we lost a lot of people. Like there was crew that went a lot to industries like the film industry. Security went to hotel quarantine, and the artists that they were the most hit. People that perform on stage, and a lot of them had no choice but to have a complete career change. And what I worry about is, are they going to be able to come back? Because we're still in rocky territory. So, yeah, that's my greatest concern, because art is so important, music is so important.
Well, let's get to our next question, which comes from Matthew Francis.
Thank you. With many CBDs around the world significantly rattled by declining office occupancy rates, many leaders of large companies are pushing for workers to return to their offices ASAP. However, many surveys of professional workers show hesitancy to return. Perhaps the panel could address these phenomena and provide some insights into their ideas of the future of the CBD and office buildings in particular.
George.
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's think about the 10 years leading up to COVID. Some of you remember here in Melbourne, certainly in Sydney and in parts of Brisbane, you had the city doing things that it hadn't done before. The outer metropolitan boundary was being extended, and also the apartment living. So the cities were being built up and out, and we haven't had a sort of city growth model like it in our history that I can find, because normally people leave the inner city for the outer suburbs or leave the city for another part of Australia. So whether that was killed by COVID and whether we're reverting to another model, I'm not so sure, because the thing that was driving especially that growth in the inner city were international students as well as workers. So the biggest landholders in the inner city of Melbourne, for example, are Melbourne Uni and RMIT. And the same would be for the city centre of Sydney. You'd have Sydney Uni has a big land holding as well. Now that's missing because we've obviously let international students work remotely for a couple of years, and because as each year graduates, we haven't replaced that stock. So the unis have still got a huge crunch coming even after we reopen. So that's one of the parts of the organism of the city that is on hold now, which will eventually come back. But the other part, to go to your question, the idea of having a workforce concentrated in the CBD, I can't see that. And I'm going to throw to Andy. I'm going to be a journo for a split second and ask Andy about it, because you could tell us basically how your workforce has reacted. Phase 1 last year, where a lot of them probably felt the idea of working remotely was cool. Phase 2, a few more wanted to get the face-to-face back, and phase 3 now, burnout. So if I could, sorry to do this to you, but if I could take it to Andy as well.
Well, I think as you said earlier, George, I mean, we're certainly not through all of this yet, so I don't know that we've got all of the answers or had all of the learnings. I should say I'm an eternal optimist. I'm very positive about the CBD. I think if I look back at over the last 200 years and look at us as people, we love to socialise, we love to congregate, we love to get drawn to the city.
So this isn't a terminal decline of the CBD?
I don't think so. In fact, 200 years ago, 3% of people lived in cities. As short ago as 50 years ago, it was a third. Today, it's a half worldwide. And so I think we will continue to see a phenomenon. I think the role of the CBD may well change. I'm involved in the National Gallery of Victoria, and there's an amazing $1 billion plus whole redevelopment of the arts precinct. The restaurants in Melbourne have come back quicker than the offices have. I do think, though, as I said earlier, I mean, we're very keen to embrace hybrid ways of working, and I see, sort of 3 places where you could work. One is in the CBD, where you might come where you want to showcase products and services to customers, where you want to do big celebrations, you get big groups together. Locally, where people can just access facilities of a company, and then also at home. So I think the point about hybrid ways of working is giving people the flexibility to work where they want, when they want, and how they want. And I think the CBDs will reinvent themselves, and they may look a bit different, but I'm an optimist.
That hybrid, though, might work for a major corporation. More difficult, I suppose, Emma, for smaller businesses to have 3 options as to where you're going to work.
Yeah, I mean, we had flexible work options before COVID because that was sort of a core. It's almost built into our DNA as an organisation because that's why I founded it in a way. And we really see flexibility as much more than just where you work, but it's also about how you work and when you work. And I think the other thing we need to think about, which we have spent a lot of time, I guess, contemplating, is it's about workplace culture. And what does it mean to create a really inclusive, nurturing, flexible culture where people can come to work and be their full selves? And I think that's one of the big questions I think that we're asking ourselves, is this idea that you have a personal life and then a professional life and you keep your personal life out of your professional life. That kind of idea has been shattered with COVID, seeing as, our kids are in the background of our Zoom meetings. And I think the bigger question, is not where we work, but what does it look like to have a truly inclusive culture as organisations where people can show up to work and be themselves, whether they've got cultural differences or differences in gender identity, that is really embraced.
Yeah, and it's the why we work. If it's just money, or is there some purpose that you're after? Look, the one I just want to bounce around, because I think the question touches on something that a lot of employers and workers, no doubt, will be grappling with. Should bosses be able to demand, and should they demand, people return to the office if they think it's best for their business? Should workers be able to say, no, I'm not going to return to work? Does anyone have a view on this?
We'll put it this way.
No, I would say, I mean, certainly we're not demanding that people come back to the office.
You've decided you won't do that.
We won't do that. Now, there are obviously certain jobs at Telstra that you need to go to a different location to do the job. So our field techs, our people in our stores. Yeah. But if you can work from home, you're willing to work from home. So 100%, for an example.
So every employee at Telstra can say, I'm just going to stay at home.
100% of our call centre staff are able to work from home. Currently, 80% are choosing to do so. Do I think that that's going to be the proportion going forward? I don't know. As we said with George, I think we're yet to really learn. But I think giving people the flexibility, and I do agree with Emma, I mean, it's not just about where you work, but certainly that approach to hybrid is very helpful, and also, as we heard from Eliza, to actually improve inclusivity and.
But George, not every company is going to do this,
well,
right?
But here's the test, right? For the companies that say you've got to turn up, if the worker does get a better offer, they'll take it.
Yes,
exactly.
In a tight labour market, that's what you're right.
That's what will this be tested at some point in a court or tribunal? The rights of workers to say no.
I'd love to see it, but I don't want to re-regulate the labour market. By the way, I've got to remember I'm an economist at one point. I don't want to properly re-regulate. I wouldn't trust politicians with the rules that they'd put in place. But I would like to. I do like the idea of the worker having more leverage, and the boss want to try to have everybody back at their computer so they can look at them all day. Again, I'm going to reference my old job, not necessarily going to reference any particular editor, but there was a time and a place, I remember in the media, where the editor wanted to see all the staff just waiting there like firemen and women ready to answer the call. And you spent half the day in the office pretending to do stuff. You couldn't pick up a phone.
Now I'm curious who this editor is, George.
Well, I don't know which one it was now because I completely...
Jane, let me ask you...
By the way, remember I left in 2012. Sorry, before we go to John, there's another question Matthew was alluding to, and that is land use. Yeah. So if there's an overshoot in commercial buildings in the CBD, and this happened once before in Melbourne, late 80s, early 90s, basically built too many of these things, Skase and Bond and whoever and all those crazy banks. There was an overshoot, and that's when the residential, that's when the sort of the reboot to residential living in the inner city first started in Melbourne. Because no one lived in this area. This area didn't exist 30 years ago. So there may be a version of this negotiation between office worker, employer, and then tenant or buyer who wanting to live. So I'd love to see that thing shake out as well. Again, more power to the worker and more power to the person who wants to move into the city.
All right, our next question is a video, and it comes from Walter Lee in Ashfield.
Andy Penn. Happy International Men's Day for tomorrow. This generation of men want to play a greater part in the raising of their children. However, parental leave and flexible work are still options largely reserved for women. Research shows that men are twice as likely to have their request to work flexibly rejected, and that men who choose to work flexibly are less likely to be promoted than women who work flexibly. At Telstra, what are the rates of men and women taking up flexible work and primary parental leave? Have you set targets for men to take up these options? And what are you doing to ensure that men who work flexibly are just as likely to be promoted?
Andy Penn.
Well, thanks very much, Walter. And it's a great point. And we have actually, I'm trying to think when we did it, it was a couple of years ago now, introduced parental leave, paid parental leave for dads as well, and so.
And how long is that?
16 weeks.
Right.
So and we've had a good number of men in our organisation that have taken it, and again, I think I don't want to keep going back to the hybrid working, but I think the point about flexibility enables a family to be able to work together to work out what is the best way. That they can sort of
Walter's asking too about the comparative rates. I don't know if you have those off the top of your head, but compared to women, are men taking up that leave?
Yes, they are, but I mean, overwhelmingly, it's more women that take up that leave. But it's there and it's available. We've got lots of examples where men are taking advantage of it.
Yeah, Emma?
I mean, I think one of the reasons we know that even when there are policies in place that there isn't actually as much uptake from men is because the social norms that guide our society haven't yet caught up in a way to those policies. So I think some of the work we need to do is to work on changing social norms to encourage and create that environment where men feel like they can play that equal caregiving role. And then there's other policies that also need to support that, including things like free, publicly funded early childhood education, which Australia really doesn't have at the moment. And so these gendered issues, it's not just about sort of creating one policy, unfortunately, that's going to change things, but we need multiple efforts that are going to address that. The gender pay gap, the superannuation gap as well, play into that.
And Emma, you touched on it earlier. I do want to come back to it, how the pandemic has differed for men and women, and in particular with work from home, which we've been talking about tonight. Has it been a different experience for blokes and for women?
Well, we know that it fundamentally has. Unfortunately, the vast majority of people who have taken up that kind of unpaid caregiving role at homeschooling is women. I think there was a McKinsey study that showed that women with young children, I think, were 23% reported that they were considering resigning or downsizing their careers, compared to only 16% of men. So women are doing that. Also, we know that the industries that were most affected by COVID, whether that was our frontline workers who were kind of putting their own safety at risk to take care of us, vast majority of women-led sectors, the ones that women were much less likely to get JobKeeper, they were first to lose JobKeeper. They've been the first to kind of have their industries affected by redundancies. If you think about the insecure and casualised workforce, so it's been. I mean, people think that actually potentially the COVID impact has set back gender equality decades, and unfortunately, the policies have not really taken that into account.
Eliza, what about your experience when it comes to sharing the parenting duties during the pandemic? Has that been what's happened, or has it been a bit different for you?
It's been completely different for me. Yeah, so what you was just saying, Andy, so my partner got 3 months paid leave. So when I was just gave birth last year, so we had a newborn at the time, and so he got those 3 months paid leave. And then we were able to suddenly both merge into working from home. I worked on a book that's coming out next year on parenting with disability called We've Got This. He was able to, work in the office, and the office was just in the studio. And so then we were homeschooling, and my 6-year-old daughter would, say to my partner, Carl, hope the traffic's okay. And he would walk a couple of steps and go into the office. And then he would come inside and we could have lunch together, and then I would have a break, and then he would have a break, and we could take the parenting load, and I would do some homeschooling and he would do some homeschooling. So for me, it was the opposite. But I have heard from many people that that is not the case, and that unfortunately we've still got so far to go, because some men do just get to work in the office and shut the door, and the women take the load.
Yeah. I've got 3 young children. Great, I'm a single parent. I have a great, their dad is an amazing co-parent, and we split time week on, week off. And so when I have them, it's 3 of them at home trying to run a business and homeschooling. It was literally impossible, and I just think the burden on sole parents in particular, I just can't express how challenging it was. And
I can imagine. George, let me ask you, I do like to ask you big picture questions. As the pandemic, this has been often noted, shone a bit of a light on existing inequalities, whether it's gender inequality, and we've had a lot of focus on that, particularly earlier in the year, racial inequalities. Is this something that's, again, coming to the fore when we talk about these issues about the workplace now as well?
Yeah, look, I want to frame, it's a good question, and I want to frame this by thinking about what is the thing that the society spat out that you didn't expect, but once it happened, you thought it was always coming, that COVID. I'm asking you all to put your thinking caps on and think about which social movement exploded this year. Now, we obviously took a cue from the US last year with Black Lives Matter, and that didn't seem to take off. There was another cue from the US, which was a sort of anti-vaxxer, Viking raid on the Capitol. That doesn't seem to be taking off.
Is that what we're seeing a bit of in Victoria,
there's
in Melbourne?
There's a bit of performance at the margin, but I don't think it's taking off. But something did really blow earlier this year, and that was from the moment Grace Tame was
named Australian of the Year.
Australian of the Year, and then Brittany Higgins brought her story forward. It's almost as if that was the collective moment where women of Australia said, right, we've had it with you guys. And I think that was the pressure cooker of COVID last year. And there are a couple of structural issues that were there from the start, but COVID's done something else. So COVID is the first, so the health part of the lockdown, which brought on a recession, is the first one since the early 60s where the majority of jobs laid off belong to women. So we're still 160,000 jobs short of where we were, I mentioned earlier, where we were in February of last year. 2/3 of those jobs belong to women. Recessions in the mid-70s, the early 80s and the early 90s, 8 out of 10 of the jobs that went in those recessions belonged to men. Blue-collar workers in manufacturing, construction, mining and the like. This time around, it's women in the performance in the arts, in education, because we've obviously, for some reason, the federal government wanted to do a drive-by on higher education, which they pulled off. There was also a bit of burnout in health, a bit of difficulty in teaching, and a couple of other sectors too, hospitality, restaurants, cafes. So when you impose a burden like that on 2/3 of the workforce, and then you expect them to do the homeschooling at the same time,
there's going to be a problem.
Young kids or kids approaching year 12, first year uni and stuff, something had to click. Jane, something had to snap, and it did.
Do you agree, Jane, with what George is saying there?
Absolutely, and I think we just need to be clear that women are sick of it, and there's not a woman sick of it. And there's not a woman I know who hasn't got a story, and they'll share that story with you if you ask them. I've got stories, everyone I know has got a story. And let me tell you that the thing that we know, particularly with lockdowns, is that some of the things, and this is why I think Grace Tame absolutely hit a nerve with people, what's been exacerbated, it's been things like domestic violence. And so being able to say, we're over this, we need to do this differently. The comment was made earlier about social norms. That is so true. We need to say unambiguously, it's not okay. And it's not okay unless someone says it's okay. So that's why I think George is absolutely right. This has struck a chord. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking older women, women in their 70s, women in their 80s, they're all talking about it. And let's hope that that galvanises change. We've seen some changes in legislation coming, which I think is fantastic in relation to consent. But I think we need much more than that. And to go to the earlier conversation, David, if you look at societies that are more equal than here, if you look at some of the Scandinavian countries where men actually get equal access to maternity and paternity leave, where men take an equal share in the raising of those children, not only do they have a great relationship with their kids, but the women can get on with their lives and their work as well. So let's hope we can take steps in that direction.
All right, I've got to get to our... Just very quickly, Emma.
No, I wanted to agree, but I think this issue about exacerbating inequalities is a huge issue that has really played out with COVID. And I do think that the movement, I think it actually builds off I do think it is building off the Me Too movement, which was calling out sexual harassment. We know Australia, 1 in 3 Australian workers experiences sexual harassment in the workplace. It's worse for First Nations people, women with disabilities, gender diverse people, and that has, I think, plays into this idea of the Great Resignation, which is around toxic workplace cultures, which is a topic we haven't yet kind of delved into yet. I would love to go a bit deeper into that.
Well, we do need to get to our next question, which comes from Lisa Burns. Lisa.
Hi, hello. Look, I'm the parent of a daughter who has autism and epilepsy. She's also just developed this year seizures as a result of stress and anxiety. Her psychologist considers her capable of working and able of working in an office. However, her employers requested that she work from home due to a fall from a chair when she hit her head. This was the result of a seizure. This has further isolated her from the world. She no longer takes public transport and she doesn't chat with her co-workers. She sits on the couch at home and works. I realise that there's, and I applaud your work too, but I realise there's a lot of people with disabilities that are perhaps enhanced by working from home. But my question is, will the work from home phenomenon further marginalise people with disabilities? And I'm quite concerned about it for my daughter.
I'll hear Eliza's answer in a moment. Just to explain for us, Lisa, has the employer here have any medical justification for this position?
There has been 3 reports from my daughter's psychologist, and at the moment we're awaiting the final one, and the employer will make a decision. I'd like to point out that this is coming very driven by OH&S. The HR department has really tried to support her, but they're being driven by fear.
OH&S is saying she should not be there.
Yeah, and we're still negotiating. She's still negotiating, but remembering that she has autism and epilepsy as well as this. She is with NDIS. She's funded to work 16 to 22 hours a week. But if she's told that she can't work sitting on a chair, where can she work? And where's her future? She's 22.
Eliza.
Well, thank you for opening up. That's, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I see that as discrimination. Yeah, just purely discrimination. She should be allowed to work there. I mean, different if we're in lockdown and we all have to work from home, but once we all start to move back into the workforce, whether it be for hybrid working or where we all go back in, I think it should be choice. There are a lot of people with disability that going to the workplace is a place where you feel connected, where you create community. So it's not all people with disability should work from home. It's not that simple. No. I think for a lot of people with disability, when the lockdowns hit, it was really hard to suddenly work from home and not have that connection and not have that community. So it's, I think it's both. I think that there are a lot of people that really need that workplace culture.
Andy Penn, what would you say to that in terms of how an employer manages a situation like that and ensures that the workplace is more inclusive?
Well, look, I think that the companies that are going to be successful in the future are going to be those that can attract the best talent. And I think attracting the best talent is putting in place the sorts of policies that can accommodate. We've recently introduced and trialling with trying to improve our neurodiversity within Telstra. We've changed our recruitment processes so we don't necessarily go through the normal interviewing process for people who've got particular mental conditions and challenges that they have to deal with. But I honestly believe that, particularly in a market where employment is quite tight, really the successful companies are those that are going to be able to really adapt. And we introduced a concept called all roles flex, a bit like Emma, 10 years ago, where the concept is that it's the manager's job to work out how to accommodate the flexibility that the employee needs, not the other way around. And you've just got to reverse the onus of the obligation.
All right, well, our next question on another topic comes from Thomas Kinnear.
With less than 5% of people from low-income countries fully vaccinated, what meaningful steps is Australia taking to promote vaccine equity from our booster-filled ivory tower?
Jane Halton, this sounds like one right up your alley. What are we doing? What should we be doing when it comes to helping our region with vaccines?
Look, thank you so much for that question. And you're right, low-income countries, it's actually 4.7% of people in low-income countries have had one or more doses. That is a disgrace. And if you look in Australia, if you look across our whole population, and it's great that we are where we are in terms of vaccine coverage. We're in front of the UK, we're in front of the United States, and that's fantastic. It's going to give us freedoms. But we have to help. We have to do our bit to ensure that the rest of the world gets vaccinated. Now, it's good, we're donating doses, and I'm really pleased with that. We're working with partners, and we're actually thinking not just about shipping vaccines, but thinking about the last mile, how we get vaccines into arms. Our near neighbour, Papua New Guinea, our good friends literally just across the top of the Torres Strait, you're looking at 2%. Now, it's complicated, it's difficult geographically, but we have to work and help our neighbours to get the same kind of health outcomes. Globally, 53% have had one or more doses. African countries, if you look at Ethiopia, it's sitting on about 3%. It's actually not good enough, and particularly as we start using boosters, there's good health reasons to boost with these vaccines, but it doesn't mean we should actually ignore low-income countries. We have to do our bit.
Well, I was going to ask you that.
I'm working hard to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to interrupt there, but we are donating, 7 million so far, 20 million have pledged till mid-next year, 40 million by the start of 2023.
60 in total, that's right.
Yeah, is it either or when it comes to whether we should use them for boosters here or give more to developing countries? Ultimately, does it become a choice of one or the other, or can we... whenever you ask someone in government about this, they say, we'll do both, boosters here and we'll donate to the region.
Well, look, one of the things we can do, of course, is think about the AstraZeneca production capacity in Melbourne. Now, they're busy at the moment producing other sorts of vaccines. Can we contribute to global manufacturing? We probably should. Can we work with our Indian colleagues who have not been exporting for some period to actually get more exports out of India? So I do think we can walk and chew gum, but we have to walk and chew gum. We can't just look after ourselves. And it's worth remembering that there are health consequences here. If there are new variants, particularly in countries where vaccine rates are very low, we all know that a variant like Delta, which started in the Indian subcontinent, it rapidly ran right around the world. So none of us are immune. It's in all of our interests. But you know what? It's also the ethical, equitable, right thing to do. And we do have to, as a rich country, turn our mind to this and make this happen.
All right, and to wrap the discussion tonight, our final question comes from Dennis Fitzgerald.
As one of those who has gone through the Great Retirement for real, with all the speeches and prezzies, I think the current resignations might be fake news. Is it some young people spitting the dummy, or do we really have to worry?
All right, we're going to get some quick responses here. George, is this just young folks having a dummy spit?
In the US, probably not in the US. If it starts to happen here and it just happens with young folk having a dummy spit, I still would like to see it, because I'd like to see this place shook up a bit. You can't go through an episode like COVID and then return to all the prior assumptions of 2019. I'd like to see, especially young people, I'd like to see them shake the place up a bit.
Yeah, Eliza?
Look, I think the fact that we're talking about it tonight and that it's happened in America, it gives us a bit of time. I think it's up to employers to create the workplaces that people want to work in. So creating inclusive workplaces, having diversity a priority, making it flexible, thinking about people as people that have families at home, and so prioritising the people within the organisations, and then that will, in the end, retain those people.
Yeah. Emma, what do you think? Is this...
I mean, I think young people maybe are on the right track, and that, you know, they're saying enough is enough because we have an economic system that historically has served a minority. And I think this is an opportunity for us to really think about how we can recreate the economic system, our workplaces, to be truly inclusive and serve all of us. And maybe it's a great revolution. That would be nice.
Great revolution.
Yeah, I like that.
Andy?
Well, young people are our future, so it's important that we listen. And I think that, in fact, there is research that shows that really that between 20 and 40-year-olds are twice as likely to want to change jobs at the moment than those that are older than that. So I think there's evidence of that. And I think, many of those younger people actually, the sorts of things we started the conversation with about purpose and values and why we're working and what we're working on and what contribution does the organisation make that I'm working for, are really, really important to them.
Yeah, it matters. Jane, finally to you.
Yes, and it's not the great dummy spit. Actually, on the contrary, I think it's the next great workplace revolution. We've seen IT creating revolution. We saw the Industrial Revolution. I think this is the next revolution. It'll go to purpose, it'll go to how we work, and it'll go to what connections we make that for us are real. And that's for everybody, I think, and I think it'll be a great thing.
All right, that's a great point on which to finish. And that is all the questions we have time for tonight, but we do want to pay tribute to Trevor Crosby, who is a passionate dementia advocate, and he asked a question on Q&A's Aged Care special. Sadly, Trevor passed away last month. Here he is on the program back in February.
Does the future hold any hope for me and my dementia mates, all 472,000 of them? 472,000. You think COVID's big?
And our thoughts go out to the Crosby family. In fact, Jane, you were on the panel for that program with Trevor. He really was great at sharing his work and what was going on in that community.
He was a passionate advocate, and I had the privilege of actually talking to Trevor after we finished that program. I sought him out. I told him that my husband's name was Trevor too. We had a bit of a bonding experience, but he was a passionate advocate and a representative of the fact that people with dementia have huge amounts to contribute. And I'm so sorry to hear that he has passed, and my deepest condolences to his family.
Yeah, all right, well, thanks, Jane. And thanks to our panel tonight, Emma Fulu, Andy Penn, Jane Halton, George Megalogenis and Eliza Hull. And Eliza will perform for us shortly. Eliza, that's your cue to go and set up. And thanks to our fantastic studio audience for being here tonight and for all of your questions. It's been a real treat to have you back in the room. This is my final Q&A for the year. I do look forward to being back with you next year. Next week, Stan Grant will be with you live from Sydney, looking at all the issues of the week. We're leaving you now, though, with Eliza Hull performing Running Underwater, a song about disability, pride and acceptance.
cookie-cutter version. It's not doing me any favors. I don't wanna bring a fuel to the fire, but I gotta get louder. I gotta take the weight of me. Show my bones for you to see. 'Cause I'm not getting far running underwater. 'Cause I'm not getting far running from you. I remember when I was 5, they told me to walk in a straight line. Growing up, I was always sucking in, trying to be pretty and just to fit in. I don't wanna bring a fuel to the fire, but I gotta get prouder. Gotta take the weight of me. Show my bones for you to see.